This video is brought to you by Portrait Mode. Okay, so I own the CVE10 for a little over 1 year now, and in this video I would like to talk a little bit about my conclusions and my thoughts. I've been using this camera a lot over the past year, and you're actually currently looking at the beautiful 4K image the camera produces. If you consider buying this camera, make sure to watch this video until the end. Also, if you have this camera, you might find some of the things useful that I mentioned in this video. Also, this camera pretty much kicked off and started my YouTube channel, so I think it's just fair to follow up with the video here and talk a little bit more about this camera. Of course, everything that I say in this video is going to be my personal experience, so feel free to share your thoughts down in the comments below. Also, if you have any questions about the camera, make sure to let me know down in the comments as well. Okay, so let me explain a little bit how I use the CV10. It is basically my main camera here in this YouTube studio setup. So I mainly use it as a YouTuber camera. I also bring it with me whenever I shoot a street photography POV to be able to capture some B-roll. And of course, when I'm out there vlogging. Before we look at the pros and the cons of the camera and dive into the nitty-gritty, I would like to mention one thing, and that is that I don't quite understand how Sony marketed this camera as a vlogging camera. To me, this is much more a YouTuber or studio type of camera than it is a vlogging camera, and I will explain why a little later in the video. Okay, so let's have a look at the pros. First of all, the CVE10 has a lot going for it for its price point. Of course, the camera has an interchangeable lens system, which is great if you want to use, different focal lengths. And what I really appreciate is the fact that you have a headphone and a mic input. The build quality of the CVE10 is decent. It's not the greatest, but it's definitely not bad either. And I personally like having these recording indicators. There's basically a red light right there and a frame around the actual screen, which indicate that I am currently recording. Other than that, I think the flip out screen is pretty decent. I heard people complain about that it cannot be used with sunglasses. I personally don't really wear them, so I cannot speak on that. Also haven't tested that. But to me, I didn't have any major issues, even, using it in bright sunlight. Generally speaking, I think the CVE10 is a great all-around camera, and you also get Sony's new color science with it. Okay, so these were a few general points that I wanted to mention. So now let's have a look at what the camera has going for it in terms of videography and photography. When it comes to photography, I really like that the camera has all these different focus modes. Also, the autofocus is super reliable and quick, but there are a few caveats that I will go into in just a second. I actually have 2 or 3 videos here on the channel where I take some photos with the CVE10. I will have them linked up here and down below in the video description. As I said, the camera works great for photography, but there are a few things that are very annoying that we are going to look into in just a minute. Okay, in terms of videography, I really like that we have all of Sony's picture profiles in the CVE10. Even though the camera only records in 8-bit, it is good to have some of these options available. I wouldn't suggest you to record in S-Log3. I personally stick with the HLG3 picture profile, but man, the image quality and the 4K of this camera is amazing. HLG3 pretty much gave me the best color, so that is why I stick to that profile. I was actually shooting a lot in the Cine 4 picture profile earlier, but then later on switched to HLG3. I think Cine 4 is great if you're shooting outside. It gives you a more natural look, but HLG, as I said, works great for me in this indoor setup. So again, the 4K video that is actually 6K footage that is downsampled is great, and the camera, as it is an APS-C sensor, has pretty decent low light capabilities. Coming from an A5100, I've been used to, having to stop my recording every 10 minutes or so because the camera was overheating. This is not an issue with the CVE10, which is amazing. With the CVE10, you get unlimited recording time. I think there's actually a setting in the camera where you can set it to some lower sensitivity where it doesn't shut off automatically. And the last thing that I would like to mention before we hop into the cons is how easy this camera is to use as a webcam. You just select a setting in the camera, then plug it in, and you're basically ready to go. All right, so here is where it gets interesting. Let's talk about the bad and the ugly. First of all, let me touch on some more general things. The camera doesn't have any weather sealing, which is not that great, but pretty understandable for that price point. But we are still getting that very old sensor from, I think, 2014 or so. It's basically the same sensor as in my older A5100. And that definitely comes with a few downsides. Another big issue for me, especially for photography, is that the camera lacks customizable buttons and dedicated dials. I would definitely love to have at least 1 or 2 more customizable buttons. Of course, you can reprogram some of the buttons, but still having dedicated dials and buttons is always a good thing. One major issue for me is that the camera only has one internal slot to save your settings for photography, for videography, and for the S&Q settings. So you cannot really save multiple configurations of your video settings, for instance, unless you move that data onto the SD card. And that is a huge problem because whenever you format your SD card, all of your saved profiles are gone. The way I fix this, or basically work around this issue, is that before I format my card, I always plug in the card into the computer and save that Sony folder where all these profiles are stored to copy it back over after I formatted the card. Well, I mean, even with my Fujifilm X-E1 and X-E2, I can save, I think, 7 different profiles. But yeah, this is what we have to deal with the Sony CVE10. If there was no workaround like that, I think this would be a deal breaker for me because I'm actually working with several different profiles for video and photography. My first slot is actually dialed in to work with this studio setup, so it has a custom white balance and everything so that I just need to press the record button. Then I have another profile which is dialed in to work when I'm vlogging and another one that I use to shoot B-roll. Alright, so these were some of the more general topics that I wanted to mention. Now let's have a look at photography. There are 2 downsides for me that I would like to highlight, and one is that the camera doesn't have a viewfinder. Of course, the CVE10 is not a camera that was specifically made for photography, but it would definitely be nice to have one. Again, I totally understand why it is not there, and personally, this is not a deal breaker. If it is for you, you might want to check out the A6400. Again, I'm totally fine with the flip out screen, but a viewfinder would have been nice to have. The other issue, and that is almost a deal breaker for me, at least for photography, is that this camera doesn't allow you to set a minimum shutter speed. I primarily shoot in aperture priority, and not having the option to set a minimum shutter speed forces me to shoot in manual mode. I quite honestly don't understand why this option is not in the camera, and Sony, if you see this, which you probably don't, please add that into the CVE10. Alright, let's talk about videography. The first downside that comes to my mind is that the camera doesn't have in-body stabilization, which I believe, again, is okay for the camera's price point, and having a stabilized lens, like the kit lens for instance, definitely helps. Okay, now let's talk about the active stabilization in the camera. It is basically unusable. Again, I will have to reference a few other videos that I recorded here on this channel which go much more in detail on this topic. If you're using the active stabilization, specifically on the lower shutter speed, it is all over the place. It jitters and flies around in the corners, and to me this is not usable. Of course, there is a workaround for that as well, so don't use the active stabilization in a CV10 because it also crops in quite a bit. What you then have to do is run all of your footage through Catalyst Browse and get it stabilized in that software. Again, make sure to watch the video that I've linked down below in the description if you want to learn more about this, but generally speaking, you will have to record in a higher shutter speed, and it is just an extra step that is super tedious for you to get that perfect footage out of the CVE10. It does work, and it does work great, but it is just that extra step that you will have to go through. Running your videos through Catalyst Browse also helps with the camera's rolling shutter, which brings me to the next point, which is obviously rolling shutter. The rolling shutter on this camera is super bad. And again, that is why I don't understand why Sony marketed this camera towards vloggers, because this is unacceptable. If the active stabilization would make a better job here, I think this would kind of work, also if it wouldn't crop in that much. But again, I think the CVE10 is much more a YouTuber or indoor studio type of camera than it is a vlogging camera. Well, and that is it for the downsides in regards to videography. As I said, there is a workaround for basically all of these issues, but it just means that you have to go through an extra step to get your footage where you want it to be. I'm pretty sure that Sony is well aware of these issues and that they will fix that in the next iteration of the ZV camera. Okay, so what is my conclusion? Actually, before we wrap up this video, let me tell you about today's sponsor, which is me. Portrait Mode is an Instagram alternative for street photographers where you can upload your photos, build your portfolio, and showcase your work. The platform is free, and among all submissions, the best photos will be featured on the website's homepage. You can check it out and learn more at the link down below in the video description. So let's get back to the video. If your focus is photography, you will be better off with an A6400 because it has that viewfinder. But if you're looking for a cheap all-rounder camera that does everything, not everything perfect, but everything pretty decent, then the Sony CVE10 is your best bet. Again, I don't quite understand how this is meant to be a vlogging camera, but if you're planning getting into videography a little bit or have a YouTube setup like this is the perfect camera for you. Again, you will find all the videos that I've mentioned down below in the video description as well. If you want to pick up a Sony CVE10, I will have an affiliate link down below in the description. If you use that link to buy the camera, that would help me out a lot. Anyways, guys, I think that is it for today's video. If there's anything that I forgot, please let me know down below in the comments. I'm happy to answer all of your questions there. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I see you in the next video.